This Sunday on Rosemary Barton Live.
I have no patience for separatist blackmail.
Separatism concerns. The former cabinet minister who tabled the Clarity Act speaks out on the perils of Alberta independence. What are the dangers that could lie ahead? Former Liberal leader Stéphane Dion is here.
We have 1,000 new border officers who will be coming online over the next 3 years.
Border security. In changing and challenging times, what's being done to secure the country's borders? In an exclusive interview, the president of the Canada Border Services Agency joins me.
It is a fight for every penny when we try to institute a price change.
Sticker shock. Canadians are still dealing with high grocery costs. A new report offers a clue why. I'll ask a Canadian food manufacturer why prices are going up. It all starts now on Rosemary Barton Live. Thanks so much for joining us on this Sunday. Alberta separatists have 3 months left to garner enough signatures to trigger a referendum, something the Premier says would happen this year if the separatist group can get the required signatures. Do you agree that the province of Alberta should cease to be part of Canada, to become an independent state? That would be the question that the Alberta Prosperity Project is putting on its petition, and I guess would be the question for the referendum. The wording specifically chosen to reflect the phrasing that is required in the Clarity Act. That's a federal law that was passed after the 1995 Quebec referendum, a law that could potentially serve as Alberta's pathway to separation. Earlier, I spoke to Stéphane Dion. He's the former Liberal leader, and he was also the minister responsible for the Clarity Act. Stéphane Dion, nice to see you again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rosemary.
So explain how the Clarity Act would work if Alberta goes through with this referendum.
The Clarity Act is giving effect to the Supreme Court reference.
Yes.
That the Supreme Court said that in order to trigger a negotiation on secession, that means the province removed from Canada, you need to negotiate a constitutional modification that would make this province disappearing in the Canadian Constitution. And for that to negotiate in order to protect the rights as much as possible of everyone. And it's a very, very difficult negotiation. In order to trigger this negotiation, the premier of the province will need to show that its population clearly wants to secede. It's not something that it have big. It's a clear will to stop to be Canadian. Would be happier if we were not Canadian. If a population come with this consensus, then you start to negotiate and you try to come to an agreement of separation that will, at the end, become a change in the Constitution of Canada. That's the process. It's a very demanding one because to trigger the breakup of a country is not something trivial. But at the same time, if a population clearly doesn't want to be Canadian, there is a process to make this happening.
Are you surprised to see this growing separatist movement in Alberta?
But for the reason I mentioned just before, Alberta is the place in the world where the regional government has the more power on natural resources and the more natural resources per capita. And then you come with these policies that we need to do in order to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions to save the planet burning, and Alberta forest burning, by the way. And this is a shock and a difficulty. I think this difficulty should be solved within Canada without putting the existence of our country on the table. It's a mistake to go towards separation. But of course, there is tensions about what is the proper eco-climatic policies that we should apply in the case of Alberta.
The Alberta separatist movement, I'm sure you've seen this, has been speaking to American officials in some capacity, even talking about getting access to money, a credit line from the U.S. What do you make of Americans being involved in that conversation, Stéphane Dion?
I think it's completely irresponsible to have done, because we know that President Trump is somebody very difficult to predict what he will do, but he has clearly expressed his view about annexation of territories in order to get the resource of these territories. We need to remember that in Canada is almost alone around the world where the control of natural resources is in the hands of the provinces, of the regional entities, and not the central government or the federal government. In the US, natural resources are federal. That means that if you invite Trump to in Alberta, and maybe to take control of Alberta, that means that Albertans, 5 million people, will have to share the dividends of their natural resources with 240 million Americans. It would be a good deal for Trump, but completely bad for Albertans. And it should be said. Nobody's saying that, so I'm saying so. It's completely irresponsible to have done that from the point of view of Albertans and, of course, of all Canadians.
You know, of course, you're from Quebec, obviously, and in your home province, the Parti Québécois has seen a great amount of success in the polls. There'll be an election in the fall. They say if they're reelected, they will also hold a referendum. What do you make of that reality, that it could be happening in two places in the same time?
Or maybe three. There's a petition in Saskatchewan as well. I think it's foolish. If you see the other countries, they have the same disagreements. And it's tough to find solutions, a lot of difficulties, but these other countries, they don't put the existence of the country on the table each time they have a disagreement, only in Canada. And what Canada has done to be considered this way, it's one of the most admired countries in the world. I was in Europe in the last 8 years. Everybody's in love with Canada. You have more than 1 billion people on this planet dreaming to become Canadian. So why are we in Canada always talking about the possibility to split our country? It's a shame.
What advice would you give to the federal government, Monsieur Dion? As you know, the Prime Minister signed a memorandum of understanding with Alberta to look at the possible creation of a pipeline and to do some other things around energy in that province. That was partly how the Prime Minister wanted to deal with some of this frustration that Albertans are feeling. What would be your advice in terms of how to handle this situation?
I have no patience for separatist blackmail. And when the Premier is involved in separatist blackmail, you should say to the Premier, I will come with a deal with you if it makes sense for Alberta and Canada, but not in order to mollify the separatists of your party. Put your country before your party, please. That would be my reaction. If this agreement makes sense for Canada and Alberta, you do it. But don't do it in order to please the separatists. It never works. And it's a waste of energy. In my province, Quebec, I've seen that so much. People full of skills and talents, instead of working to improve the situation of Quebec in Canada and Canada as a whole, they are trying to split the country and they are wasting their energy in it. That's very sad for Quebec. I don't think Alberta should emulate that.
Do you think that the Premier, who put in place this ability to hold petitions that would lead to a referendum, Premier Smith did that, do you think that was risky on her part?
Irresponsible, because she needs to be clear. Is she indifferent about the fact that Alberta is in Canada or not? Does she cares? And if she cares, then she should say so. It's completely wrong to split the country. She should say that very clearly. And then why she lower the bar to have a referendum on it if she's against separation? And imagine that you have a yes vote. I know it's very unlikely that Alberta, most people will vote yes to leave Canada, but assume it's happening. Who will negotiate? The first step that we need to have in Canada about a secession process, it is for the Premier of the province to call a constitutional negotiation in saying, look, I have a clear majority on a clear question. From my people, they want to leave Canada. We need to start the negotiation. And the negotiations will be very tough. You will have a lot of difficulties, including territorial, since Aboriginal peoples, especially in the case of Alberta, a strong claim about their territories to stay in Canada. Will it be Premier Smith that will lead these negotiations for Alberta? If she doesn't believe in separation, does it make sense that it would be her that will go in these tough negotiations for something she does not believe in? It's a mess. And she needs to clarify what that means for Albertans and Canadians, the situation she has created herself.
Stéphane Dion, very nice to see you again. Thank you for making time for us.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marie.
In these changing political times, securing Canada's borders is taking on increased importance. Up next, I'll speak to the president of the Canadian Border Services Agency about how her organization is aiming to recruit more officers at the borders and the work being done to address the flow of drugs and migrants. You're watching Rosemary Barton Live. Hey, welcome back. Part of the Prime Minister's plan to address crime in Canada starts at the border. Last October, Mark Carney's government announced new measures to increase security and address something the president talked a lot about, fentanyl, but other drugs too, coming across the border. Part of those measures include hiring 1,000 new CBSA officers, also includes an increase in technology and resources available at ports and points of entry. I spoke with the Canadian Border Services Agency, Aaron O'Gorman, about the progress the CBSA has made to secure those borders and how they are addressing the flow of drugs and migrants there. CBSA President Aaron O'Gorman joins me now. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
Nice to see you again. We thought it would be good to sort of check in with where things are at because there was so much focus on the border over the course of last year. Maybe you could just give me a sense of how the border might look different than it did last year in terms of staffing or the picture you're seeing there.
Sure. So we continue to focus relentlessly on the border, as you can imagine. So seizures continue apace. We have seized, CBSA has seized more drugs this year than last, to the tune of about 30%. We've seized more prohibited weapons, as many firearms as we did before. So that work continues. Travel volumes are down a little bit. And we have 1,000 new border officers who will be coming online over the next 3 years. So very excited about that.
I'll start with that end piece first, because of course that was one of the promises from the Prime Minister. He wanted more border officers. What is the recruitment process like then? If you need to get 1,000 in place over 3 years, how quickly are you able to hire them?
So CBC has been quite lucky, maybe speaking to what great jobs they are. We don't have a problem recruiting. So we have currently 90 officers of the 1,000 who are right now at our college in Rigaud who are training.
Okay.
And we have a pipeline of pre-approved candidates who will be coming in at pace over the next 3 years. So,
to go back to the drug seizures, because of course that was the other element that was a preoccupation for one person, at any rate, the President of the United States. You said seizures have gone up. Does that mean that you're just catching more, or that there's more trying to come in?
I would say a bit of both.
Okay.
So we are focused on all modes. In fact, just this week we had a seizure of methamphetamines equal to about $33 million in street value in Sarnia. So a huge seizure, and we're seeing those very frequently. So we have new technology, and we have the excellent work of our border service officers who are well trained and finding these drugs, both coming in and going out.
What about the issue of fentanyl? Has that increased, changed? What have you seen there?
So no change, negligible amounts, often through the mail, and we work closely with our American colleagues and our law enforcement partners to work them back up. Where are they coming from? Work them down. Where are they going to? But no significant change. Those numbers are low.
So that remains a non-problem, or a problem that you had already sort of taken control of. Is that fair to say?
So I think for CBSA, all contraband, all drugs moving in and out are a problem.
Sure.
And what's particularly insidious about fentanyl is the small amounts in the envelope will kill people.
Right.
But stepping back to your question, those amounts remain low, and Canada is not a source of fentanyl to any significant extent in the U.S.
As you know, the RCMP commissioner was here last week, and we were talking about the border and the role there as well. He talked about how the new technology the RCMP has brought in has made a huge difference in terms of being able to take people into custody. I'm wondering what kind of technology CBSA has brought on board that is also making a difference, whether it be with contraband or drugs or what have you.
So the border plan provided funding, significant funding to CBSA. For just as an example, this year and next we'll bring 14 large-scale imaging pieces of equipment so that can look at trucks and look at containers coming off of ships. So that will make a difference, as well as new labs where we can test substances quite quickly and determine what they are when we seize them, and then everything in between. Handheld, medium-sized equipment. So over the next 3 years, that's all coming online and making a big difference.
So the imaging things, those will go to ports. They'll go to how will those be used?
Ports, land ports of entry as well. Okay. So quite efficient to put a truck through one of those versus we call it unstuffing, versus taking everything out. Okay. So between that and our canine, our excellent canine detectors, who are always on the job and very helpful as well.
There is obviously an immigration crackdown happening in the United States. I'm wondering whether you've seen any evidence of people worried about their status in the U.S. trying to get across at regular border crossings or irregular border crossings.
The Commissioner talked a little bit about how those numbers have gone down. So we had fewer asylum seekers last year than the year before, and so far in January 2026, those numbers are lower than they were last year. But every day, CBSA officers are processing people who come to seek asylum in Canada. Some of those people will come in and avail themselves of processes that are available, and some of them won't qualify to come in, and for those individuals, we do return them to the U.S. under the Safe Third Country Agreement.
Right. What is CBSA's relationship with ICE? Is there a relationship, and how concerned are you that the perception of ICE right now is influencing perhaps that relationship?
We have relationships with several law enforcement and border enforcement agencies, particularly on what we call our 5 Eyes, or we call them the Border Five. So the extent to which we continue to talk about threats, what we're seeing, movements of people, how people misrepresent themselves. But on a day-to-day basis, they are not our foremost partner. We work with Customs and Border Protection every day on opposite sides of the border.
You had an incident at the border. I'm not sure how long ago it was now, where your technology went down, and it was problematic, obviously, given how many people go back and forth. The minister, I think, asked you to find out what was going on and solve the problem. Have you reached any results from that in terms of what actually happened?
We did, and there were 2 incidents that were unrelated that happened in the same week.
Okay.
One related to a patch that had to be put on the systems, and those same patches had to be put on the systems of some of our partners, and there was a communication breakdown in that regard. And the other one was human error. So we did do a study. It's out there. It's public. Yeah. And working closely with our colleagues in Shared Services Canada that has responsibility for the IT infrastructure, and we obviously have responsibility for other parts of our systems. We have a 10-point plan. How do we reinforce our systems? How do we make sure communication is extremely tight with our trade chain partners, importers, exporters, and our airline colleagues as well? So met with, I think, about 100 of them last week to talk about the plan, talk about how we can do better in the event of an incident. But no, it was significant. That was September, and so far we've had pretty good system performance since then.
I'll just end on this. We started with sort of a picture of the border. What would you say to people who have concerns at the border, either going into the United States, which obviously isn't what you're in charge of, but people who are increasingly concerned about going into the U.S. and the kinds of questions they're being asked, and then coming back from there? How are you dealing with people's anxieties around that?
And our officers do that all of the time, every day. You know, in terms of coming back to Canada, make sure you have your passport with you and your documentation, and I think you will be well served by our border service officers. If you're bringing back contraband, they will find you, and there will be significant consequences. As far as going into the U.S., it's difficult, and you know, I think you need your documentation. You need to have your letters, you know, if you're going to work. But I think you use caution and conduct yourself accordingly.
Okay. Erin O'Gorman, nice to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Since Donald Trump's threat of annexing Canada started, fewer Canadians have been going into the United States. Abacus data reports that 1 in 4 Canadians say they have avoided travel to the U.S. because of the president. And that growing concern over the treatment of some Canadians at the border has also increased some people's fears. I spoke earlier this morning with an Ontario man about his experience getting detained at the border. Greg Williams, nice to see you this morning. Thanks for making time for us.
Thank you for having me on.
I'm wondering if you could tell us sort of the short version of what happened when you tried to cross into the United States last year.
Yes, so November, we were going on a family vacation. We were heading down through the Ambassador Bridge, Windsor to Detroit. Once we pulled up to the booth, did the passport dance and had a few questions answered, 15 border agents pulled me out of the car, and I was forcibly detained at the border.
Wow, and why?
So as the time progressed, from what I was told is that I have a name that matches someone in the States. Apparently Greg Williams is a common name. And that was enough to have me handcuffed and put in a cell to confirm that I was not this other person. So it was purely just a flagged name in their system.
And how long were you detained for?
The better part of 2 hours. So it was, it was quite a long time. I sat in a cell there on the border for about an hour, hour and a half, and then another half an hour to 45 minutes in a processing room waiting to get fingerprinted and photographed.
So were you freaked out? Like, what were you feeling while this was happening?
Yeah, once they started asking the questions, I knew something was up because normally it's pretty quick, you know, where are you going? What are you doing? Yeah. Do you have any produce? And then once they radioed and said, you know, car off, hands on the dash, and then all of a sudden, and I've said this many times, it was impressive. Within seconds, there was 15 of these agents around our car. Immediately once they're at the door saying, get out of the car, and then I'm in handcuffs a minute later, that is a little bit terrifying. Sure. And then just kind of not knowing what is happening. You know, they weren't really talking to me all that much. I did hear one of them say something where I asked the question, did you say I'm being arrested? There was no answer. It was very vague. And that part was scary as well, because I was just not getting answers. I was trying to comply as best I could, but I was just given no information. I still don't really have any information. which is also kind of terrifying because it just sort of happened.
So how will this, or how has this affected your the idea that you would go into the U.S. again, that you would cross the border again? Are you hesitant to do that again?
It's definitely nerve-wracking. What I was told at sort of the end of this time is, as the officer was literally knocking on the desk, was this probably won't happen again now that we have your photograph and your fingerprints and you have a file with Homeland Security, as long as you have this passport. So when my passport expires, I don't know if that means I'm going to have to go through this again. But again, it was the probably that freaked me out, because it's like, oh, they could just decide to do this. I don't know. So it is a little bit scary to think, yeah, anytime I could go in there, I might have to deal with this again. And I had my wife was with me, my dad was with me, and they had to watch this happen. You know, scary for them as well, right? Because they didn't know what was going on and they weren't given any answers.
I suppose this could have happened at any moment, and it was just sort of a weird coincidence that you got caught here. But I wonder whether between that incident and some of the things happening in the United States, whether just as a Canadian, you're sort of rethinking how whether you want to go down there and whether you want to be there anymore.
Absolutely. And I mean, our whole thing was we weren't even vacationing in the States. Like many Canadians, you know, we are feeling a bit of the squeeze, and it was cheaper to fly for where we were going, to fly out of Detroit, which is the same distance from where we are to fly from Pearson. So by saving money, it was like, great, we'll just go to Detroit to fly out of Detroit. And, you know, now it's just one of those like, well, I don't know if that's a thing we will continue to do, because we don't know, again, we don't know if this could ever happen again. Now, anytime if we were to think about that, we're like, we have to go the night before, because we can't risk being detained and missing a flight.
Do you have advice for Canadians? I mean, again, obviously this was like a weird freak coincidence, but you don't know very much about why it happened. So I'm wondering if you have thoughts about how Canadians should be approaching crossing the border.
I have said a little bit as I've talked to people that, you know, you have to comply. You know, it's it could be worse off. I certainly did not want to run my mouth because I know what's going on down there. So I was very like, Kate, tell me what you need from me. Tell me where you want me to go. Like, I kept asking, just because I was like, reiterate everything so that I don't do anything wrong, because I don't know what unchecked power is at play here. So, yeah.
Greg Williams, I'm sorry that happened to you, but I appreciate you telling the story. I think it's important. Thank you for making time for me.
Thank you for having me.
Still ahead, a former prime minister gives a call to action across party lines.
The question for Canada is not how we feel about what the U.S. is doing. It is, how will we adapt?
Will Stephen Harper's message of unity in dealing with the United States help Mark Carney? Will it push Pierre Poilievre to take a more forceful position? It's Sunday, and what would that be without these people? The Scrum, they're back just ahead. This is Rosemary Barton Live.
past year, Canada has faced a challenge unique in our lifetimes, a hostile United States, one that has openly questioned Canadian sovereignty, that has openly broken the trade commitments that we have made to each other, and that regularly issues further threats against us. To be clear, these realities mean that we must reduce our dependence on the U.S. in order to protect our sovereignty and our economy.
Former Prime Minister Stephen Harper with some rare public commentary about how Canada should proceed in its relationship with the Trump administration amidst new realities. Do his comments back up what Prime Minister Carney has been doing? Could it push the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, to take a stronger position on how he would deal with things if he was Prime Minister? Let's bring back our Sunday Scrum. Tana McCharles, the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Toronto Star. Aaron Wary, Senior Writer for CBC, also here in Ottawa. Emily Nicolas, a columnist for Le Devoir in Montreal. I will say that Ottawa this past week was sort of like in a bit of a time warp if you walked around downtown, because you kept seeing all these people from the Harper era celebrating 20 years since Harper won, and obviously the unveiling of his portrait. But Aaron, it was those words, I think, that got a lot of people's attention, in part because Stephen Harper doesn't talk that often, frankly, to a domestic audience anyway. How did you read his comments and how they sort of play into the political moment we're in?
So first, I think it's important that a former prime minister, a Conservative prime minister, spoke with that much clarity about the situation that Canada faces at this moment. I thought his remarks about, some people, particularly in the business community, sort of hoping that things will snap back, that being, not a safe bet. I thought that was important for him to say. In terms of his sort of broader call for unity, particularly across the two major parties, I think, again, it's important for a prime minister, a former prime minister, to say that, some things are beyond the partisan competition for power and for electoral victory, particularly a prime minister who, with full respect to him, was not, immune to partisan competition and battle. I think it will be interesting to see what that could mean in practice. Or I guess the next question would be what that means in practice. I don't know that it means the parties are suddenly going to agree on everything, or that the Conservatives are suddenly going to down tools and not oppose things. But I do think it is an important kind of idea to have, that when it comes right down to it, in terms of the dealing with the United States, in terms of dealing with the internal pressures that we could be seeing in Alberta and Quebec, that, angling for partisan advantage isn't as important as holding the country together and defending it from an external threat. And I think it will be useful, I guess, for everyone in the political arena to sort of have that in the back of their minds going forward.
What did you make of the comment, Emilie? It was certainly something just to hear from him on these issues, because he doesn't do a lot of sort of backseat driving on policy and politics. What did you make of the comment?
First of all, he's the only man in Canada who could do that. There's no other Conservative prime minister. There's no other non-Liberal prime minister still around. And he's definitely the only prime minister from Alberta as well, which is a very specific place to be from, making those.
Yeah, Joe Clark is around, but he was a progressive.
Kim Campbell.
Yeah, but he's not,
Kim Campbell. You're right. But they're not being active. They haven't been making public comments in ages. But you're absolutely right. I'm sorry about that. But still, there is that issue of. It's a very, very rare position for him to be speaking from. There is also the issue, I think, beyond the Conservative Party itself. I think the issue is really Canadian MAGA, and how far it is already entrenched in some part of the country, how hard it is still for us to name that it played a role in the occupation of Ottawa. And how it is playing a role in Alberta separatism, and that even with Pierre Poilievre's best effort, it is playing a role in part of his base and making it harder for him to take certain policy stances without having to deal with part of his base And that isn't something that is within Canadian control. That is very much the result of years of online influence, if not interference, from American influencers and American TV channels that are heavily listened to in certain part of the country. And it has created an ideological proximity based as well on language and cultural proximities that are hard to ignore and that are making it harder for conservative leaders, regardless of their personal qualities, to keep everyone on the right aligned with basic patriotism. And I think it's really helpful that Stephen Harper is doing that. But I think that's the issue. And so God knows I can be the first one to criticize Pierre Poilievre when I want to, and that needs to be done. But I think we also need to acknowledge that, let's call them patriotic conservatives, are often in a rock in a hard place, more and more on certain issues. And they are trying to find solutions to keep everyone aligned so that there isn't a blowback when Pierre Poilievre says invading Greenland is bad. And that is the issue that we're facing now.
You wrote a really smart piece, I thought, Tonda, this week about sort of Mark Carney and Stephen Harper, and I wonder what you think Stephen Harper's language and comments mean for him as Prime Minister, whether they help him in some way.
I was struck by the message that Harper gave, obviously, to the business community and to the government in opposition to cooperate. I was also very struck by the message that he sent to the government side, which is he said that, yes, the opposition has to set aside constant opposition to everything and cooperate on the big things like Canadian sovereignty. But he said to both leaders, Carney and Poilievre, cooperate when it comes to domestic policies that threaten unity. And he also said to the government on his Monday appearance when he got the gold medal at the Royal Canadian Geographic Society, that the opposition should support the government on a number of things, those big things, but the government should not then exploit the opposition's support to disadvantage it politically and to advantage the government. And that was very much saying to Mark Carney and his Liberal caucus, if you want support and you want cooperation, then when they offer it and give it, accept it, but don't rub their faces in it. Don't use it then to besmirch the leader and goad them and say, oh, well, you're agreeing with everything we're doing. And I think that's an important political message that also can feed, if they're all sincere about wanting to cooperate on these big questions right now, that's a message that needed to be heard.
Yeah, I don't doubt their sincerity. I don't think any of us would. I doubt their ability to do it a little bit, I think.
Political
Erin.
pressures, right?
Yeah. And that kind of speaks to the moment. And Emily, you're sort of talking about it. Like, it is very hard right now to both criticize the government and sort of stand up for the country. That is a hard position. When I talked to Conservatives about it last weekend, they said that is a demonstration of the strength of our democracy, which they're absolutely right. But that sort of puts to how complicated a moment we are in, Erin.
Yeah, I think it's always easy to call for bipartisanship. It's harder to explain exactly what that should look like.
Yeah.
Particularly in a parliamentary system that has an official opposition. I think I think if there's a piece of this sort of beyond the mechanics of Parliament and how politics is going to work going forward, it's for Pierre Poilievre, I think, in terms of, I don't know that we've necessarily heard from him exactly how he sees the American relationship at this point and how he sees it moving forward. And I think that's one of the things that seemed to stand out about Harper's remarks, is that you hadn't heard something like that from Pierre Poilievre. And I think, which is not to say that he should stop talking about housing or grocery prices or all these things that are very important. But I think, we've heard Mark Carney say, the old relationship is over. This is a rupture, not a transition, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know that we've heard that from Pierre Poilievre. And I think that is, there's lots of discussion about how he should engage with Donald Trump and whether he should, say his name more often, for instance. I think what's missing at this point is a real sense of where Pierre Poilievre sees the relationship going forward, whether he agrees with Mark Carney's take or whether he sees, something different than what Mark Carney sees.
Yeah, we are told that he will have more to say about Donald Trump. That was part of what came out of that convention. Emily, 20 seconds to you on what you would expect to hear from Pierre Poilievre.
I think we had the test last week when someone from the White House went on Fox News and said that Mark Carney had walked back his Davos comments, and some of the Conservative Party bit at the debate, essentially. Yeah. We need to have a stronger immune system in terms of when the White House is trying to have discord in Canada, that we cannot use that as partisan attack. And so that's what I'm expecting from Pierre Poilievre in the future, to know the difference between critics that is coming from within Canada and parroting the White House lies.
Emily Nicolas, Aaron Wary, Tonda McCharles, thank you for spending part of your Sunday with me. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Aaron mentioned their grocery prices. Well, among G7 countries, Canada had the highest rate of food inflation this past December. Why is that? What can be done about it? My conversation with a Canadian food producer, the co-owner of Neal Brothers, is next. You're watching Rosemary Barton Live. You and probably everyone you know, very aware of the rising costs of groceries. The question many ask is why, particularly since Canada was recently tabbed as having the highest rate of food inflation among G7 countries. A new report by the Bank of Canada into the rise of food inflation in 2025 offers some explanation. The report suggests a main culprit is imported processed foods, things like coffee, chocolate, olive oils, though the cost of domestic foods like beef are rising too, and that the significant depreciation of the Canadian dollar and disruptions from U.S. tariffs are also big contributing factors, as are weather conditions, the cost of labor, and food producers are being squeezed, which means you are too. Chris Neal knows all about that. He's a co-founder of Neal Brothers Brands, and I spoke with him this morning. Chris Neal, thank you for joining me this morning.
Thank you, Rosemary.
What has been your experience with rising costs and how that is affecting your business and how you're pricing your products?
Well, it's been an interesting ride the last couple of years. Not only do my brother and I own a brand, two brands actually, Neal Brothers, which is focused on snack foods in the natural and organic sector, and also a recently launched line of coffee, which is an organic fair trade coffee. And as we all know, both of those, coffee's been in the business or been in the news a lot lately because of price increases. But we're also a distributor for about 200 brands across the country. So we kind of see it from the retailer's perspective, we see it from other brands' perspective, and from our own. And it's been a really challenging ride. Throw some of the other things into it, of course, and you can only imagine what we're seeing day to day.
And it seems to be particularly challenging in Canada. You know, we have the highest grocery costs of a G7 country. What is the biggest issue that you are seeing when you decide, okay, well, we have to raise prices because otherwise we're not going to be able to make any profit here?
Well, this is where things get really interesting. So as a distributor, we're kind of in the squeezed section.
Right.
And I will applaud the retailers, the major grocery retailers in this country, because it is a fight for every penny when we try to institute a price change. They all have huge commodity sections because they all buy produce and they've all got their own private labels. And so they're fully aware of anyone trying to get things passed that they don't see fit. And so while many would think that Neal Brothers controls their own pricing, to an extent we don't. If we present a 10% price increase to Loblaws, let's say, Loblaws might come back and say, sorry, we're only going to accept 6%, so it's 6% or nothing. So it has forced real challenges down through the system.
And what is contributing to the costs then? Is it climate change? Is it supply chain? Is it trade problems with the United States? Like, what is the central issue?
No, you've pretty much nailed it there, Rosemary. It's a combination of a number of factors right now. Let's start with a higher U.S. dollar in terms of purchasing U.S. dollars. So for any of those brands that are dealing with anything out of the States, you're now dealing with almost a 40-cent dollar, and that's not something that is easily sucked up in our business. Geopolitical issues. Peter and I got a phone call from a significant U.S. news source shortly after Russia invaded Ukraine and said, what are you going to do about your oils? And we said, are you sure you have the right company? We're a small company up in Canada. And they said, you buy organic sunflower. All organic sunflower oil comes out of Ukraine. What's your challenge? And so that was an immediate call to our supplier to say, oh my gosh, what are we in for?
Yeah.
And climate, I mean, we've seen it in tomatoes especially. All of our sauces are tomato-based. Pasta sauce, barbecue sauce, salsas. And while we source from Canada as long as we can through the year, we are forced to go to either California or elsewhere. And when you're dealing with organic product, there are very few sources around the world to look for. And so you're paying US dollar, you're paying, if there's a drought, you've got decreased yield, increased price. So it's coming at us from all sectors.
So what would help then, Chris? Like what would help Canadians see lower food prices in your mind? Would it be competition? Would it be, I don't know, what would be the thing that would make a difference, do you think?
I honestly don't have the answer for that, Rosemary. Because, we're also seeing it increase rent. My brother and I merged our distribution business with friends a couple of years ago because the warehouse we were in, the lease was up and our rent was going to double. And it wasn't even a big enough space. And so, you can't stop anything from a geopolitical perspective. Canadian manufacturers certainly, don't have a dollar issue, but if they're buying any ingredients, there is a dollar issue. I don't have the answer. I don't think it's a competition-based thing. The competition is fierce between the big five in Canada on the retail sector. And so they keep each other really honest. And again, as I said to you, it's not easy for us to push price increases through. We deal with a brand called LaCroix. We're the Canadian distributor for LaCroix, a sparkling beverage. And it was hit by Canada on retaliatory tariffs. So we don't export, so we're not faced with U.S. tariffs. But in retaliation to those U.S. tariffs, Canada slapped a 10% tariff price on it. And again, that's going to the chains and saying, okay, will you accept this? And it's going back to LaCroix and saying, will you eat this? And it's been a real challenge. I was on a panel for an agri-food panel just recently, and the gentleman said, I'm going to ask you all, what would you recommend to someone in the food business? And then he started to laugh and he said, the first thing you can't say is don't go into the food business. And the four panelists all just killed themselves laughing, because that is reality right now.
There was a big push for people to buy Canadian, as the trade war started, like this time last year. I'm wondering if you still see that, or whether the costs have outweighed the patriotism of choice at this stage.
I think February, March last year, it was real, and we were forced with issues as a Canadian company. Peter and I, and in our distribution business with our partners, John, Luke, and Neil, we employ 160 people. So in most cases, we're looking after 160 families. Yeah. And yet we were importing some U.S. product. And that was a real tough time, because some of our products for Neil Brothers are made in Canada and some are made in the U.S. because the U.S. manufacturers are the only companies that can manufacture that product for us. Right. So Canadian-based company, the profits stay in Canada, the jobs are in Canada, the goodness remains in Canada, but the raw product itself was made in the States. And I think you're seeing another kind of rally around it right now, just in the last month or two, obviously, with what's going on with the political situation south of the border.
Chris Neil, thank you. I know it is complex, but I think that will help Canadians understand a little bit, so we appreciate your time.
Appreciate your time, always. Thank you. Go Canada, go.
That's RBL for this Sunday. Thank you so much for watching. Lots of Olympic coverage coming up here on CBC News Network. I'm Rosemary Barton, and I'll see you back here next Sunday, if not before. Have a great week.